welcome to the Author Blurb podcast. I'm your host, Eric Maynard. Today, I'm speaking with Jeff Berney. It was a fun conversation. I enjoyed talking with him. I can't say it enough. I enjoyed talking with all the authors, obviously. He was fun to have a conversation with. Hopefully you enjoy it as well as much as I enjoyed having it. As you're listening to it, you'll hear us talk about his 2 thriller books, the story behind it. We do get into a little bit of, I guess you could call it shop talk, talking about audiobooks and the work that goes into producing books, and the fact of a lot of authors, we do have lives. I think it was a fun conversation nonetheless, even if you can care less about our personal lives, about what goes in behind the writing. You can still enjoy him and I talking about his 2 books. So there's A Killing Secret and The Fall of Faith. Now, both sounds interesting. Both sounds like something that you can really get into. The reviews of his books are amazing. It's going great from how it looks like. I would suggest listen to the interview. And hopefully if you're listening to me talk, you can listen to him and you enjoy it. Because we're all here about trying to find and enjoy and get to know new authors and their books. So take that time, enjoy, reach out to me, reach out to Jeff, however you prefer. You can go to authorblurb.com where I have all the information for Jeff, for myself, for other authors that's been on the show. You can find the show's YouTube video feed there. You can find links to any player that I know of where you can listen to the audio or you can watch the video. Right now, only 2 places I can think of where the video is playing, but I try to provide you what I can. Go there, enjoy it, have fun, read articles that some of the authors have written and submitted for your pleasure. And yeah, that's about the gist of it. Before we get into the show, I just want to ask you, if you do enjoy the show at the end of it, or halfway through it, or if you're listening to all the episodes as they come out, let other people know about it. One, it makes you look like you know what you're talking about, like you know books and you can share good ideas with people, because who doesn't want to look good in all this? It also allows people to discover the show, helps the show grow, authors get their discoverability, and people to enjoy their books. And that's what I'm here for, is so that people can find great authors that they don't know of yet. So thank you. Enjoy the show, and I'll talk to you soon. So I'm here with Jeff Berney, and we're discussing his 2 thriller novels that he has, A Killing Secret and The Fall of Faith, I believe it is. And forgive me, Jeff,
That's okay.
It's always better for the author to go in and discuss everything about themselves in their books. And that's really how I like to start things off. Like, if you could help us out a bit, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your books, and then we can get right into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Like you said, my name is Jeff Berney. I write thrillers. I have only been a professional novelist for about 4 or 5 years. Been writing since I could hold a pencil and telling stories, much to the chagrin of my parents when I was growing up. I'm also a professional advertising writer and creative director. And so I've always had a passion for writing, I guess, and for making things up. And I've always wanted to write a novel. I think every writer has I'm going to write the next great American novel. But great American novels aren't necessarily the genre that I like.
Right.
I really do prefer thrillers. And so, yes, I've written 2 thrillers. The first one, A Killer Secret, is more of a psychological thriller with a kind of a very intimate cast. There's only 3 main characters, one of whom is a serial killer. And then my latest one, which just came out last October, is The Fall of Faith. And it's more of a domestic thriller. It's kind of got a little bit of romance in it, not a lot. It's a very twisted and twisty story with a much larger cast as well. And I just enjoy kind of making these stories that have these twists in them that hopefully people can figure out.
All right. So let let me ask you this then, and let's start it off properly because psychological thrillers with your first one, a killing secret. With that one there, what's usually or not usually, it's already out and printed and all this. What is the story starting off as? Is it, I mean, obviously it's all mental and psychological, but what are we getting into that story?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Part of what I wanted to do as an author, because I do love thrillers, but I also noticed that in a lot of thrillers, jam packed with action, lots of twists and turns, which are great, but the story goes so fast that really the characters aren't necessarily fully developed. And when
Hmm.
you broke down, kind of the story leaves your head with it.
Right.
So I've tried to craft, and I guess it's up to the reader to tell me if I've done it well. But I've tried to craft stories that hopefully have very realistic characters and things about them that are, I don't know, rise above the genre and kind of stay with them. But so when it comes to A Killer Secret, the story is basically it's about three people. The main character, her name is Edie, and she is a young psychologist, um, basically kind of starting her practice in Kansas City, Missouri. And she lives with um, a guy that she begrudgingly calls her boyfriend. He's much older than her.
All
Um,
right.
he was her professor in college. Super pompous guy, and his name is Adrian. Also a psychologist, also her business partner. And she really is at this crossroads in her life. She doesn't know if this is what she's meant to do. She doesn't know that if she's helping anyone at all. She knows that she's in a dysfunctional relationship, but she's not sure if she's worthy of anything else. And then, as she's contemplating this, one of her new patients, and his name is Timothy, he tells her that he's a serial killer. And so that kind of jumpstarts the action in the book and, gets her kind of more interested in psychology and in what she's doing and really wrapped up in, is this guy telling the truth or is he just, you know, crazy in another way and making this up? And so that's kind of the story. And it kind of stems from the fact that everybody has secrets. We
Hmm.
carry secrets with us. Some are darker than others. And what I wanted to examine in this story, because all three of these main characters have secrets that kind of ooze out slowly as the story progresses. I wanted to examine what happens if one of those characters has a secret that they think is worth killing for.
All right. So with that is, and I guess I can't really ask which one has the secret because that would kind of kill the story plot line. But with with the plot and all this that you have, is it driven in like is the character? Here's a better example. When I wrote my novels, I wrote them as I went with the characters leading the story. I knew where I wanted to go. I knew where the endings were, things like that, or at least I had the general idea. So I had a plot and a story that led me there. With yours, is it so? I consider my story more of a character based story, which some writers tend to be more focused on the plot and stick to the plot, and I'll adjust the character to match the plot.
Right.
How's your stories come through? So if I'm reading it, am I getting to know the characters and finding that the characters are who's bringing me in, or is it the plot line, the story of what's happening that kind of captures me?
Yeah, another great question. A Killer Secret is definitely a character-driven novel, particularly with the fact that, I talked about the three main characters. They're almost the only characters in the book. Like I said, it's a really intimate setting. Um, I do point of views from all three of them. Um, it's kind of up to the reader to decide which one of them is a reliable narrator or unreliable narrator. I think at times they all fit, one or the other. Again, trying to keep it realistic. None of us are totally 100% honest all of the time.
Right.
And I really think it's more interesting to get to know the characters in the book and for the plot to be driven on what they would do and how they would react to what somebody else does in the book.
All right. Now, with you're saying it's very intimate in three characters alone. Is there is it just like a short period of time taking place where you only have these three characters? Because it kind of sounds like they're not interacting with anybody else other than these three people.
There are some minor characters, but I wouldn't even call them secondary characters, other than a police detective that gets involved as things start to get bloody. Um, but really, everyone else they interact with is kind of just a cursory interaction. There are other practitioners at um, the psychologist's office. There are other patients, but you get it from you get the story from the point of view of these characters, these three characters, and so it does feel very kind of isolated.
All
Um,
right.
and I did that kind of purposely, trying to make you really get into their heads and see the world from their point of view.
All right. Now, why did you choose Kansas City of all places? I've been there maybe two or three times in my lifetime, and I know it in the vaguest of senses, but it seems like I'm hearing more and more stories written in the Midwest and things like this. Why did you choose Kansas City of all places?
Well, I live in a suburb of Kansas City,
All right.
and so when it came to the setting, I kind of put in some landmarks that I knew, and I figured that would be, as my first novel, it would be easier to have kind of a mental picture of these landmarks and places that I want to put the characters into, rather than have to make them up wholesale from a random city. And I think Kansas City's it's a cool place. It's it's got a big city feel, but it's not too big, and so it just felt like a good setting for this kind of book.
All right. Now, if so, let's go this route. If I was reading your book and say I was reading it and I was visiting Kansas City myself, what's the likelihood that I would read it and going around town, I would pick up a lot of these landmarks, these street, do you have the street names in there? How much of it is really in the story and how much of it is generalized? Like I actually put old businesses that I knew, at least when I lived back in Ohio, were existing, and I'm not sure about now, but they existed back then. How much of that is in your book?
I don't go to the specific level of street names
All
that I
right.
can recall actually, but for instance, Timothy, the patient, he is a night security guard at a haunted house. Um, there happens to be a lot of haunted houses in Kansas City. Obviously, just opened in the fall, but that's kind of when this book is set. And so that haunted house exists. The place where a murder victim is discovered um, is called Loose Park. It's a beautiful park in downtown Kansas City with a huge, beautiful rose garden. That's kind of a touristy attraction. So yeah, there's like neighborhoods within the city that I mentioned that you could come and visit and would hopefully recognize by my description.
All right. Now, you said it takes place in the fall during Halloween season with the haunted house and such. What's the frame of time that takes place in your story? Is it, if it's a haunted house and he's the guard there, I imagine it can't be too drawn out.
No, it's not too drawn out. I mean, the good thing about being a security guard at a haunted house, the building's always there, even in the off season. And I do start the story in the off season, and you kind of get a sense of how bored his life is as a security guard at a place that's not even open, and how just twisted his mind is with the things that he does with the props and different rooms within the haunted house to just spend his time as he's supposedly guarding this place that is forgotten for the season.
All right. So it's not really, I guess that kind of leads me, because I never really thought about the haunted house after what's going on with the building. I know where I grew up, there was an old built hydro plant that they would rent out for that month and turn into a haunted house. So that's the mindset I had. But yeah, I never thought about the every year they have a specific building and all this. So it takes place in the off season. What, I guess here's the question, is what was the catalyst that made, you said Timothy was the,
Yes.
what was his driving factor that made him admit that he was a serial killer to start the whole story off?
Well, he's kind of a loner to begin with. And I guess I can back up a little bit. A lot of my stories have a little bit of fact in them. Not that this actually happened anywhere, but I had read a story once about a super lonely guy, and he was going to a therapist, and he had a crush on her, and he thought he would impress her by telling her that he was a serial killer. Now, in real life, his therapist turned him in. They did a big investigation, found out that he was just making it up. But that was kind of the catalyst. I thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting story, right? Someone comes to you as a therapist who's supposed to help somebody, and they tell you that they're this monster. Like, what do you do? Do you continue to try to help them, or do you try to find out if it's true? Do you get the police involved? It just, my mind started to go in all these different directions. And when I wrote Timothy, like I said, he's kind of an outsider. He's wandered from place to place around the country, and he's a war vet, and he just has nobody to talk to. And when he comes in to meet with Edie, like I said, she's kind of in the mind space that she doesn't believe she's doing what she should be doing. She doesn't believe she's a good therapist. She kind of feels to him, as they're in these sessions, like she's not engaged, like she's bored. And so he wants her to be engaged. And he just decides, all right, I'm going to blurt this out. I'm going to say it and see how she acts.
All right. Now, so it sounds, you said that you based it off a real event. With that, did you actually use the person that did all this as the basis of the character as well? Or did you go off of other things to develop your character's foundation?
Another great question. No, just that kind of nugget of an idea that really just made me start thinking about things. That's all that I used from that news article. The characters themselves, I know that everyone who's not a writer says, "Oh, you're the main character," or you must be one of these characters, or you must have used someone as the character. And honestly, for me, like, the answer is all of the above, right? I have these three characters. They each have a different purpose in the story, and I want them all three of them to be completely different from each other. And so there are elements of me probably in all three of them. There are elements of people I know. Um, and then a lot of it is just kind of made up, as you go, like how would this kind of person react to the.
So Jeff, that was quite interesting. Let me ask about the Fall of Faith. Where do we start off with that then? We go from a psychological thriller to a domestic thriller. First off, what do you consider, when you say domestic thriller, what kind of thriller is that?
Yeah, I think that, for me, a psychological thriller is more inside people's heads and more about how people are reacting to something and maybe even like a higher level intellectual type thriller. And a domestic thriller is, for me, it's more of a general thriller, a little bit more action, not necessarily having that psychological component to it. And what was important for me when I started my second book is I didn't want to write the same story, with just different people. I wanted to stretch myself as an author as well. Like I said, A Killer Secret was very intimate. I really only had to write and develop three characters. For The Fall of Faith, I wanted it to feel like it had a larger cast. A Killer Secret, I gave you points of view from all three main characters. In The Fall of Faith, you only get the point of view of the main character. Everybody else is how that main character sees them. And so that was, like I said, it was because I didn't want the reader who read my first book to feel like, oh, this guy just has one story he's going to retread over and over. And I wanted to stretch myself. And so I came up with this story about a trucker, over the road trucker. He's on his last run. He's divorced. He has nothing to go home to, and just trying to contemplate what life is like after he's retired. All he's known is the road. He's only seen the world through his windshield. And now all that's going to stop. His life's going to stop, literally and figuratively in the story. He's going to get caught in this small town, and it's filled with a cast of crazy characters, and really, the story's about someone who's lost and looking for faith, and not necessarily faith in a kind of religious way, although there are kind of undertones of that, but faith in himself and faith in the world and faith in others around him. And it's kind of the story really about how far you'd be willing to go to regain your faith in something bigger than yourself.
All right. So with being a trucker, what's the catalyst, or how does it start off with? So one thing I always ask is, if I grab your book and I pick it up open, what's on page one? What am I starting once I start reading about your story, getting into it?
Yeah. Page one, you're going to get to know the main character, Jimmy, the trucker. You're kind of get in his head a little bit, ruminate on the fact that it's his last run and really has nothing to go home to. And you're going to quickly realize that his only friend in life is his dog, who travels with him wherever he goes. His dog is going to die at the very beginning, which is kind of the catalyst that makes all the rest of the action happen. His dog dies. He goes to try to find some supplies to put him to rest, to bury him. He ends up in a truck stop that has been converted into a strip club, and not where he's expecting to be. He falls in love or lust with a stripper that he sees there. and then comes to his senses and decides, okay, I got to get back on the road. I got to do something with I got to lay my dog to rest. I got to move on with my life. And as he's trying to get out of town, his truck crashes and overturns, and he ends up in this small town called Eden, Missouri, which is a fictional town. And he very quickly realizes that this town of Eden does not live up to its biblical namesake. Really kind of this hell on earth that he stumbled into. And, kind of the action goes from there, and ends up trying to find someone who will fix his truck. And there's excuse after excuse why he doesn't leave. And the action really starts on, in that first chapter. That was another thing I wanted to try to do a bit differently from my first book. I would say A Killer Secret is a slow burn kind of thriller. It starts out slow. You really get to know the characters. Mm-hmm. And this one, I wanted that action to start right away and just keep ratcheting up. So it is more of an action-packed book than my first one, and that was kind of fun to play with as well.
All right, well, that makes sense. I mean, psychological, you're building up the suspense, you're building up all this, and then it sounds like this one, when I think of thrillers, is there murder, is there violence, what can people expect in this, other than there's going to be a lot of action in it?
There's murder, there's violence, there are people who aren't what they seem. I think people think of small Midwest towns as kind of these idyllic places, maybe if you're old enough, maybe Mayberry kind of places where, everyone's happy, everyone knows each other. But Eden is more of that small town where everyone knows each other, but that means they know their secrets and they know their darkness. And now we've got this stranger in Jimmy who is stuck there, and he doesn't know who to trust. He doesn't know these people, and as he gets to know them, he realizes this is just a crazy town, and he comes to befriend the bartender in the town, and then he also kind of gets some guidance from the town's priest. And for me, that was fun to play with, because I think if you kind of step back from the religious aspects of everything, a bartender and a priest are pretty similar in what they do, right? They listen to people's problems, they offer advice. There's some kind of sacramental involved, and so it was fun to play with those two sides of the story as well. And then, like I said, there's kind of this mismatched, star-crossed love story involved as well. And really, no one is safe in this book.
All right, so you weren't afraid of killing people off in it. It sounds like.
No, I am never afraid to kill anyone, even a main character, if it serves the story. And that's another thing. My books are not Hollywood happy endings by any means. I mean, they're thrillers, so not that it has a happy ending, but I don't necessarily. Nobody is sacred, I feel like if killing someone off would be an interesting twist and not expected, then I'll try that. And if someone that you think is awful turns out to be not too bad at the end, that's kind of a cool twist too.
All right, yeah. I mean, it's always the twist that gets you. I enjoy. You have to have those things that you expect to happen, obviously, but it's nice when you come across a story that you didn't really expect this to happen, or how the ending came out. You're kind of sitting there going, oh, because anymore, a lot of stories, I know my wife, I just kind of stopped watching most news shows, because I'm sitting there going, that person's going to fall in love with that person's going to be jealous. And it's like the first 5 minutes of the show, and my wife's looking at me going, how do you know this? I'm like, because you can see it just in their interactions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and knowing this is this type of show, by the end of it, so and so is going to kill so and that person's going to go to jail, and that person's going to walk off in a moonlit night or something like that.
Yeah.
And 90% of the time, that's what tends to happen.
Yeah.
So
I did the same thing. My
it's
wife
nice.
hates it. Yeah. But that's also, I think about that when I'm writing. How could I, obviously I know what's going to happen, but how could I fool someone like you or me who thinks about these things or kind of picks up on things? And I do try to write in clues as I go, but I try not to make them so recognizable that, my hope is that at the end of the book you get to it, it was an interesting twist that you didn't expect to happen, but then you think about it and you're like, oh shoot, I should have seen that coming because these things happened, but they happened in such a way that it still was unexpected.
All right. Well, that's always a good thing as well. So, do you have any more books that you're working on? Do you have other things that you're trying to get in the process? What's going on?
Yeah, right now I'm developing my next book, which is going to be a sequel to A Killer Secret. I've gone back and forth, as a new novelist. If all the books and suggestions are, people like series, so you should write a series, and I just didn't want to do that just for the sake of writing a series. But I took a look at who survived A Killer Secret, and usually have another story in them. Is there more that would be interesting to me? Because if it wasn't interesting to me, then I'm probably not going to bring it to life in a way that's interesting to the readers. So I think there is more there, and so the next one, I think right now it's called The Killer Introduction, and it'll be surviving characters plus new characters in a new kind of psychological twisty story. So that's early stages there, and then I'm still trying to figure out how to translate my books into audio. That you can pay for that. It's just out of my budget. I know that you can do
Right.
profit sharing even with voice artists, but that's still kind of a little.
That could be a real pain in the neck from what I've read on that too.
Yeah, and maybe it's because I don't know enough about it. I just feel like I don't want to share that.
Right. Well, from what I understand and from what I've heard about that topic alone, is usually if you do a share, then you have so if your book does better than you expect, you're losing half or whatever the percentage of that book that you wanted to get. And I know like some authors are now having more of they're recording the books themselves. I've thought about doing that with my books. I know I tested out and worked with where their Google bookstore, they have an AI version, and their AI version actually just upgraded to
Really?
where you can have different voices. So you can tag the different AI character voices, and they improve the quality of the AI from what I just heard. So I've been thinking about going back, and because I did my 3 books in the AI thing, and I chose one voice to go through it all. But I was thinking about going back and working with that, or I might bite the bullet, take the time, and then start recording my own audiobook. But like anything you choose to do takes up time, either time, money, or something.
Or both. Yeah.
Yeah.
About I haven't seen the update. I got involved in the Google AI narrator in beta.
Mm-hmm.
I have the file. I just haven't published it because I didn't like it. I didn't expect it to be like, ooh, there's a voice off,
Right.
reading your book, but it just, I don't know. It didn't make me want to get into the story with the way it sounded. So I'll definitely check out the upgrade. And I have the equipment to record my own books and narrate my own books. And I've done, tests, and I've probably done like 5 chapters of A Killer Secret. And you're right. I realized I'm not an audio engineer. Going in and editing each chapter has been a pain. And so I'm trying to teach myself a little bit on
Right.
the engineer part so that hopefully I get better and faster, because recording, I like that process. I feel like,
Right.
I feel like my voice hopefully wouldn't put anyone off. But it's the technical work behind the scenes that you're right. It's time that I could be writing another book. And so that's right now I'm kind of in that phase. Do I start this other book or do I record these other two? Because, you look at the industry news and ebooks have kind of flattened out or dropped depending on what you look at. Print books, strangely enough, have gone up a little bit, but audiobooks are just killing it. And
Oh yeah.
and I don't have any piece of that, I don't. So that's kind of what I'm looking at as a business side of being an author.
Oh, I understand that completely. I mean, we want to get our books out to as many people as we can and get it enjoyed by as many people as we can. And I'll be honest with you, me personally, I've gotten so busy with things I've done between my regular 9 to 5, because we all still have to pay the bills. Between that, trying to write, I have 3 books started, and I have a 1-year-old, a 4.5-year-old, full-time job, this show, which I'll be honest with you, I love doing this because I get to speak to so many great people like you. And then it's like, okay, where do I find time to actually do the other stuff? And I think what people don't really think about when they read a lot of authors, or they're asking why don't they do this or that, we do have limited time, limited energy, and well, we have bills too, just like everyone else. So our money has to go back to paying the bills, paying for what we've expensed to get the books made, get out. I mean, there's a whole slew of things. So, I mean, it takes time, or like you said, you have to start doing it. You have to start teaching yourself how to do it. And like I said, I mean, I literally bought everything I have for the podcast to do audiobooks originally.
Yeah.
And I'm doing the podcast, but I just haven't really gotten into. So I'm doing a memoir, and I think once I finish that, I'm gonna start recording as a way I heard of editing books is, and I try not to get too much into the nitty gritty bones of this, but one way of editing I've heard suggested is while you write down your book, you get the first draft done, and then your final edit is reading the book out loud as you go through, and then make notes, edit out those pieces. And then, because if somebody's reading it out loud, because when you read it out loud versus in your head, it's 2 totally different experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's why audiobooks have gotten so popular as well, is you get a whole different experience because you're feeling it from somebody else's inflections.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
my wife is a voracious reader, but she only reads audiobooks. Now she's my alpha reader, so she will read my books. But yeah, so there's a huge untapped audience for me that I don't know how much crossover there is from people who love audiobooks. Do they still, read ebooks or paperbacks or whatever? And yeah, I've got a full-time job. I've got 4 kids here. And I want to spend time with them, and I think that's something that before I became an author, you don't really think about, oh, a lot of these authors are not full-time novelists, right? There are very few full-time novelists who make a living based on their writing. It's
right.
often, I would like to be one of those.
Right.
It is, this is a passion project. And these are things that, we do after everything else we have to do every day.
Either when the kids are asleep or before they wake up, or, I mean, between lunch breaks and things like that. Yeah, I mean, most writers have been there, and I find it interesting that most people don't actually. They'll start writing. Like I said, I have 3 books. Now, if I finish all 3, I'm gonna be excited. And that's like I have a fantasy book I started, and then I decided to do the whole outline bit. Lost interest in completely doing the outline. Like this is just too much of a drag. Too much of a. I love fantasy stories, but it's that whole thing. You do what you can and all this. And most authors, most people, I love to rephrase that. Most writers don't finish their novels, and a lot of people have half written or quarter written novels sitting either on their computer or somewhere. And it's a real shame, but it's part of life.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think a lot of people think, oh, I could write a book, and I think a lot of people could, but once you sit down and realize, oh man, my books are like 95,000 words, and, that's a daunting thing to think about. And how do I get from 0 to 95,000 and still like the story? And it's for me. I know there's people who write really fast, but I'm like a year and a half, 2 years between books, and it's not a year and a half or 2 years of pure writing. It's because life gets in the way, and
Right.
I am not in a place where I can prioritize my writing, and so it's a side gig, it's a side project, and when I get to it, I get to it. And that's another thing. People sit down and like, okay, I'm gonna write this book this weekend. God bless you if you can, but my head doesn't work like that, and my fingers don't go that fast.
I understand completely. One thing I'm trying right now that I find interestingly fun is I'm writing it out by hand first for like my memoir. I have a notebook, and because like I said, I don't really get into the TV thing anymore. There's very few shows that catch my attention, and I'll write it out by hand, and then I'll go back and I'll type it. And like I said, that's a second edit, and then afterwards, I'll probably send it out for somebody to read, and then my final is going to be me trying to do that, read it and make notes and fix it as I go. So hopefully I can give the audience, the readers, more for their buck and get something there. I mean, so let's do this. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Obviously, I can obviously always talk to people for a long time, and I have that gift to gab, I guess. But where do people find you? I have a profile for you on authorblurb.com where people can find the links that you've provided me, your bio, where you even say that you've been in your head your whole life. So you figured why not get into your character's head? And people can, if they're listening to this audio, they can see the video listed on your profile as well. Where do you want people to find you if they don't want to go to authorblurb.com?
Sure. The easiest way is jeffberney.com. So JEFFBERNEY.com. That's my website. Find my books there. I do a blog. I've got some book-related merchandise. You can find links to where to buy my books from my website also. I publish wide, so I'm not just on Amazon, but I'm on Apple and Kobo and Google Play, and I'm forgetting someone, Barnes and Noble, and then all kinds of little booksellers online too. But hopefully, wherever you buy books online, you'll be able to find me. But yeah, jeffberney.com is a great place to start.
Sounds perfect. And I'll have that web address in the show notes as well. So anybody listening, watching, whatever, I think those are the only 2 ways you can enjoy this show. But that's going to be in the show notes. So I appreciate you being here. As always, this is going to be the end of the conversation for everybody else. But for you and I, we'll talk a little bit more after.
All right. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
It definitely was. Thank you for being here. You can go to authorblurb.com where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.